In a land oversaturated with lackluster podcasts, one podcast dares to stand alone in its complete lack of luster.
We are using words to express thoughts, deriving from its eternal word thoughts. We also take pride in the little snow preparation. We are low budget, average audio quality.
Good hair, oiled beards, boxers or briefs. Boxer briefs. We are the journey. We will journey. We will journey.
Hello, Seth. It's wonderful to see your shiny, sleepy face today.
Wow. You just had to throw an insult with your greeting. Jeez.
No, it wasn't an insult.
Face.
I said
It's not.
Your skin looks really nice today. You're having a good skin day. But you've been doing a lot of yawning.
Been out in the sun a lot recently, so maybe I guess it's bad for your skin technically. But right?
Okay.
I don't know, but maybe that's it. The sun.
Do you have like a SPF lotion that you use every day to moisturize and hydrate your skin?
Sometimes I use some like just Dove lotion.
Oh, good.
Was self-made.
I don't use
Self-made from locally fed doves. Grass-fed.
You know that
doves.
Yeah. In parts of the Middle East, they still use dove poo to tan hides. Did you know that?
I do now because of your plethora of knowledge of poo.
What's the difference between a pigeon and a dove?
I don't.
Because I feel like they said pigeon.
See, I think it's I think they're all part of the same family, but it's interesting because here they're like, I think they're all basically called the same. Taube. I don't think there is a word. It's just like different types. So in the States, like if I think in English, I would think a pigeon is being usually either like the farm animal pigeons or the street pigeons that you see all over every city in Europe. I mean, and big cities in the States, right? And
okay,
doves is like white and gray.
I googled it. Right? Yeah, you got it. The most obvious difference between doves and pigeons is the color of their feathers. Bingo, Seth, you got it. Doves are famous for their white, soft plumage, whereas most domestic and feral pigeons are blue, gray, brown, or a combination of these tones. Yeah. But they look the same, other than their color. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like most animals, I guess. You know, dogs, cats, horses, humans. It's really just our color. Otherwise, we look the same. We should all respect each other the same, and you know, doesn't matter the color. The same as doves. I feel like we shouldn't really. Right. The street doves are annoying because they poop everywhere. They build nests on your balcony if you're not careful.
Okay, so I watched something that was kind of interesting a few days ago. But it's about these pigeon races. Have you ever heard of these?
Maybe. It feels like it's ringing a bell way in the back of my cranium.
So they take their pigeons like 400 miles away from their home.
Sounds horrible.
And they release them. And they put little tracking devices on their legs, you know. And this is like big business. People gamble on this. I mean, there's all kinds of money involved in these pigeon races, but then they fly back to their coop, and the first pigeon home wins. But it's like a horse race, except a 400-mile pigeon race. It's
so they all have the same home?
No.
How do they make it so it's fair? They have to have the exact same distance to fly, right?
I think they release them from a little bit different locations, you know, within a region, so they're all kind of close, but within 400 miles.
What if one has to
home.
fly over the mountains to get home, and one just has to like take the autobahn, the highway? Yeah,
they don't. That's not the case. They all have to fly a very similar route. Yeah.
It's like Homeward Bound for doves.
It's crazy. I had never heard of this. I had no idea. But apparently these little birds have amazing,
well,
they know how to get home.
Come on, the dove in the Bible, Noah's dove.
Or does it say pigeon?
I always have dove in my...
Does it say dove or pigeon?
I always have dove in my brain, but maybe it's just because the Holy Spirit dove that comes as a dove coming on Jesus. Okay. Maybe that's why I correlate that. But I don't know. That's the thing, is in other languages, like I said, in German, there's not as far as I know, it's not different. The dove and pigeon, it's the same name.
Differentiated. That was the word you just tried using.
And then I was like, I'll leave the big words for the big scholars.
Yep, that's right. You don't want to make them look bad.
It's like when athletes and celebrities talk politics. It's like, come on, just leave it for the politicians. So I just feel like I'll leave, big words for those who are studied. I could try. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Seth, we were just kind of looking at some of our last episodes, and so we had been talking. We did 4 parts to embodiment and consciousness, and those were basically all about being embodied. So physical bodies. We never got to the consciousness part. Right in here. Yeah.
Right
you
here.
You can't see it, but I'm making hand gestures
around
my head. Kind of like a halo, or it could be moose antlers. Something like that.
In the Midwest with moose antlers. Don't run around with those this time of year. Feel me?
That's right.
They end up in the back of somebody's truck.
So I did want to finish that conversation, Seth, on the consciousness side of it, the mind.
The mind.
So now, when you talk about the mind, do you mean your brain, or do you mean something different?
When I talk about it. Let's see what I talk about.
What do you think of when you think of mind and brain?
First thing I would think of is brain.
Okay.
Yeah, like the thing that's running everything else. Whether it's whether it's your your body, your physical body, or like you also would refer to like maybe the head of a company as like the mind behind what's going on. Yeah. So that's what I think of it as the...
Well, so I recently read a book by Dr. Bruce Grayson, who, I just want to make sure I get this right. He's professor Emeritus of Psychiatry in Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia.
Oh, I heard it was Virginia.
Okay.
Doctor.
So he would use words like differentiated, for instance. So that's why you're leaving a word like that for Dr. Bruce Grayson.
I should read his book so I can.
But yeah, he wrote the book called After. And hang on one second here. I forgot to do something this morning.
Nice armpit shot.
Thank you. So he wrote the book called After. A doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond. So I read that book. It's been a while ago. I've talked about it a ton with friends and family and thought about it. But that was a fascinating book. So this guy has studied near-death experiences for around 50 years. And he studied over 1,000 near-death experiences from people from all over the world. But he differentiates those two words, brain and mind. So he would say our brain is the physical thing that we have in our head. And then he would say the mind is, Christians, we would say soul. So the way he uses the word mind would be the equivalent to our soul. And so his research has been in this field of souls or mind or consciousness. What makes us conscious? Not just like a robot. Like some sort of. What's the difference between us and some potential artificial intelligent robot of some kind? Well, it's this consciousness thing that we have. So he's done this amazing research as a Christian. So from my worldview, Seth, it leaves me feeling really encouraged in one sense, because all this research has taken this guy who was just a scientist before he started studying near-death experiences, and it's taking him from being scientist to a believer in the sense that he believes in some divine being. He would have prescribed to Christianity per se, but he definitely no longer believes in just the physical realm. He believes in the spiritual realm as well. And sorry, my throat's a little hang on one second.
Scratchy, a little mucky, a little muky.
Yeah, just a little
gunky.
Gunky. It's a little gunky. Yeah.
I want to take you.
Bingo.
Gunky
Bingo right there.
town.
Thank you for filling that dead space for me, by the way, too. With a little
Gunky town.
song that you created there.
It's plagiarism.
So anyways, I just think it's a fascinating conversation to have. I actually watched, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but there's also a documentary on Netflix about near-death experiences. And
Stranger
that's how
Things?
I found out. No.
Oh.
But that's how I found out about this guy,
Close.
because he was interviewed on this documentary. And so I looked him up after that, found the book, read the book, and interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. So Seth, now that we've kind of like talked about words, brain and mind, consciousness, physical realm, spiritual realm, how do you think about, so as the missionary, Christian missionary that you are, do you get into these types of conversations with people about afterlife and our consciousness versus our physicalness and some of that stuff? Do you get into those types of conversations or not really?
About the afterlife. Yes, about the afterlife. Not so much some of these conversations about mind versus brain and more direction where you're thinking. I mean, as far as the near death experiences, those kind of things that we've been talking about. I've talked about that with other Christian friends every once in a while, but I don't know if I've talked about that kind of thing so much with non-Christians. But definitely about like the afterlife and have interesting conversations with neighbors, with people I know through various connections and sports or our youth center or whatever. It's a very, I don't know, interesting. I mean, we've talked a little bit about one person, a friend of mine, just kind of some of sort of the mixture and blend of views that he has and that he's adopted with different religious mixtures, kind of a little bit of this God, a little bit of that God, and also it's very fascinating to me, the whole afterlife view of him and some other people I've talked to with the regeneration, and they might be, for example, Catholics, but then they also believe in a regeneration of some sort, like where you might be somebody else in the afterlife. What do you call that? Is it reincarnation? It's probably better. Yeah. And so that kind of stuff, I get in conversations about, and it really fascinates me. And then there's obviously that goes in a lot into like, okay, does your soul continue, to that next person? And so I've had some conversations about that. You would probably be someone who enjoys talking about that kind of stuff more than I would. So you might dig deeper into some of the nuances of that, or be better asking certain questions when it comes to that. I often just more listen, and ask questions, but I don't have as much of my own established oh yeah, I've done my research into reincarnation, and this is what I think about your views or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just I have my beliefs and my in my walk with Christ. I haven't done a ton of research into a lot of these other things, so it's more about listening and learning. I think I enjoy kind of getting to know people's perspectives, even if I don't agree or don't see that.
Yeah. A book that I've been listening to in my car as I take trips is the Book of Joy, which is a conversation. So it's essentially a conversation book, but between the Dalai Lama, who believes in reincarnation, and Desmond Tutu, who is Christian and believes in heaven. So they actually talk about the concept of reincarnation versus heaven quite a bit.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a book, you said, or it's an audio,
Yeah. Well, it's a book.
Yeah, the audio book.
I bought the Audible. Version.
But it's like a conversation between the two of them, kind of written form.
Yep. So they got together for 2 or 3 days, and somebody recorded everything and then wrote it all down.
Yeah, I've that is something that I tend to enjoy more, as those back and forth, almost debate style conversations where not the heavy, angry debates, but just like the conversation.
Yeah, these two are good friends.
I love that.
Yeah, they're good friends, and they show a lot of grace to each other and love, and they kid around a lot. They like to have fun. But yeah, that book would interest you, Seth, and you would be entertained by it. But yeah, this idea of consciousness, I'll just tell you briefly, my first kind of step into this world actually took place when I was meeting with somebody in a former job that I used to have at a bank. And I was talking to a COO of a nursing home. Okay. And if you would have ever gone on a sales call with me in my old life, we'll call it my old life, part one of adulthood, right?
Yeah.
I'm on part 2 right now. But part 1 of adulthood for me, on sales calls, I may talk about what I was actually there for 5 or 10 minutes. And then the rest normally turned into how's life, what's going on. You know, we would talk about all kinds of things. And so this guy that I was talking to, he also was into bodybuilding. So he was a chief operations officer of this, nursing home, big buff guy. And but he had two heart attacks where he was unresponsive. The first one for about 7 minutes, wow. He said. And he told me about what now I know is a very common experience of, I think he talked about a light in a tunnel and then being just kind of like in a blanket of love. He's like, I've never felt more at peace and more loved in my life. So he was talking about that experience, and then he kind of got yanked back into his body. And he said after being dead, basically, for 7 minutes, rigor mortis has already started to set in a little bit. And he said, so now his lungs are expanding and contracting again, but all of his muscles and everything were starting to, tighten up. And so he's like, I went from this experience of love and peace to the most excruciating pain I've ever felt in my life. And he said he was a little angry about being resuscitated at that point in time, post-surgery even. And then he is recovering from surgery, and he was telling me about this system that was in this ICU unit. It was like a code purple or something. And he said, you'd hear code purples going off all the time. Other people, it was a heart unit. Other people going into cardiac arrest. And he heard a code purple, and then everybody starts showing up in his room. He's like, what's going on, guys? He's like, I'm fine. And then he went into cardiac arrest, or he was in cardiac arrest, but he just didn't know it. So he has a second near-death experience. Once again, very similar to the first one. Just felt an overwhelming sense of love and peace and just all these wonderful things. And then once again gets yanked out of it, back into his body. And now he's really angry. He had 2 of these experiences within a few days, and he was not happy about being here. And that also is a very common thing. Not necessarily anger, but just not really being content. You remember the story of Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead, correct? Well, Catholic tradition has him as one of the first priests in the early Catholic Church of early Christian And I can't remember exactly where they place him, but Asia Minor or somewhere, I'm not for sure. But so Lazarus is, in Catholic tradition, is kind of a sullen guy. He's very stoic. Not a lot of joy in his life. Doesn't smile much. And so the only time that anybody remembers Lazarus smiling is when this young man steals a clay pot.
Okay.
And Lazarus, he starts to chuckle, and then he says out loud, "Clay stealing clay."
Okay.
Anyway, so, but, Lazarus would fit in very well, because, like, just the kind of already having been somewhere, and then having to come back to the physical world, right, produces this kind of, this longing to go back to the other thing, right? And so, if that happened to Lazarus, which we assume it probably did, then that would explain his kind of stoic nature post near-death experience. But, well, it turns out that these things are very common within near-death experiences. People feeling very loved, like some sort of light. And these things are all very biblical. God is often portrayed as light in the Bible. And so anyways, you start listening to near-death experiences and you're thinking, man, this all sounds very biblical. Well, one of the issues with that is that you have Muslim people experiencing these things, Buddhists, atheists, people kind of from all over the spectrum. So, in whatever narrative they buy into is the narrative they attribute their experience to, right? And if they don't have a narrative, then they kind of go into this like, ooh, like, I don't know what that was, but that was crazy. So as a Christian, and from a Christian worldview, listening to this, it sounds very biblical, all of that. But then again, in other aspects, it doesn't fit into our biblical narrative of we think we know everything. Because some of the things that we think we know, maybe we don't know. Now, one of the other interesting little tidbits is that about 15% of near-death experiences, based on Dr. Grayson's research, are hell experiences. Yeah, so about 85% were heaven, and 15% were hell. So that's interesting too. And he actually, the only one that he noted in the book was a woman who was an atheist, but she had some inkling of Christian belief in her past because she was very familiar with the biblical Christian narrative around heaven and hell. So she wasn't ignorant to the story. She knew it on some level. But she has this near-death experience, and she immediately finds herself in hell. She knows it's hell. She uses terminology like weeping and gnashing of teeth, being very hot, and falling into like what seems like a infinite black hole. And so as she's falling and listening to people like weeping and all the stuff, right? All the biblical narrative that we hear about hell. She starts praying, asking Jesus to forgive her. Okay? And so she starts praying and over and over and over and over and over. And she's falling, and all of a sudden she falls into heaven. So she goes from this hell experience directly into this heaven experience, and then describes all the things that all these other people that have this heaven experience start describing about being loved, and just this overwhelming sense of security. And then of course she gets yanked back to her body. so it's an interesting little tidbit, and it definitely gives us Christians just a lot of food for thought. One of the other things that I wanted to mention about this physical versus consciousness thing that the book talks about is the fact that our brains, the physical part of our brain, seems to act as like a reduction organ. It reduces the amount of information that we process. Okay? Because one of the experiences that these people have is one of understanding. Like all the things that confounded us here on earth, no longer are they confounded by, and they start, as they're released from their body, they're able to understand things in new ways that they never were able to understand before. And so immediately, just being released from our physical brain, this processing organ, they have all this understanding, and they're starting to see things. One of the things they mention is color, the more vivid color. They've never seen color as vivid as what they see and what they describe as heaven. Heaven is just vivid. Think Avatar, just bright, crazy colors. Colors that they didn't even know existed. So their experience of being sucked back into their body, they have all this understanding, and then as they're being sucked back into their body, all the understanding that they had starts to go away, and now they're back in their physical bodies, knowing that they used to understand something on this spiritual realm, and they can't articulate what they used to understand any longer. It's beyond the physical scope. So that's this book called After by Dr. Bruce Grayson. I mean, the book is fascinating. I'd recommend anybody that's interested in anything. If you have any interest in life whatsoever, go ahead and read the book. Yeah. So Seth, as a Christian missionary, I want to make a joke here, but I'm not going to. I keep wanting to throw something else in, but as no. As a missionary of the Christian persuasion, how does this stuff hit you? What are your thoughts as you're hearing me rattle off all this crazy talk?
I mean, well, we talked about this quite a bit a few weeks back. All right, I do think it's fascinating. I think it reminds me a lot of actually some of the interviews I've heard with people who do like psychedelic drugs and stuff, or mushrooms or things like that.
Oh, yeah. That's another.
And so I don't really know how to make that all work. Like, okay, what is? You even hear stories. I think numerous stories, right, of people who say they've like met Jesus while being on a trip or whatever, or taking LSD, and then they come back to their whatever normal consciousness and become born again Christians. So I don't really know what to think about all of it, because I don't think the right route is to take some kind of psychedelics, mushrooms, or try to have a near death experience so that you can
force
experience things on the other side. The other thing I think about is, people do have visions and dreams. I mean, in biblical times, that was commonplace, that people had these out of body dreams and visions. And I think of Daniel or Jacob or so many different people.
Isaiah. Isaiah had the burning coal. Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's fascinating, and I've thought more about it recently than I have most of my life. I think a lot about. I think also about the Lord's Prayer, or "Let Thy Kingdom Come," and kind of this idea of really we should be desiring and praying for God's kingdom to be here on earth. And to me, that's like a kind of a heaven meets earth sort of thing, where we would, if we're desiring that, praying for that we'd also be experiencing more of these, supernatural experiences or out of body kind of experiences, because Jesus is very clear that there's spiritual realm, that our fight is also, fight is against the spiritual. It's not about against flesh and blood. So there is all this this other realm, and I don't know exactly where that fits into just our everyday life as a believer, because I think the danger is also that you have this desire and you search after, I think you mentioned, like, you search after experiences rather than taking care of your wife and kids or whatever. You're like, it's the same thing in a different sense with the whole metaverse or whatever, like, and the way
Are you talking about Facebook?
Yeah, Facebook and video, video games going into the whole idea of like getting to experience the reality that you don't get to experience in your normal, boring life or whatever. So it's like, hey, but you can experience it if you, but these, and just video games in general, and those kind of things, movies, things that take us to like a place of not our own reality, so we don't have to kind of escape. So I just don't know, I guess, at what point it's healthy to delve too much into it, and on the other hand, it's very real at the same time. So,
right, I'll just make one. You were talking about using drugs to kind of produce this state, right? Near-death experience type stuff. So they have found, and one of their barometers for near-death experiences, brain activity. So what is death? Death is when the brain, medically speaking, ceases to function. The drugs that you were talking about lower brain activity. So they used to think that maybe near-death experiences came from like hyper brain activity. But what they've actually found is, as the brain activity becomes less and less, then people have more vivid near-death experiences. So most of these near-death experiences are being produced from low brain activity or no brain activity. In these drugs, the reason why people are probably experiencing these things is because their brain activity is being lowered, and that's what seems to produce the ability to have this experience. And so I wanted to mention that to you about it. And yeah, you're 100% right. Like, chasing after an experience is not fruitful. It's not like a but at the same time, like, people are having these experiences, right? They're not, most of these people aren't chasing after this. These are accidents. These are health things that happen, and they just have the experience. I'm not focusing on drug-induced type stuff here. These are legit near-death experiences. One woman that had a near-death experience drowned. She was under the water for about 30 minutes. She was dead. And she was resuscitated, which that in and of itself really is a miracle. That's the only way to describe that. But she had a vivid near-death experience. And in the near-death experience, she was told that her son would die.
Oh, you told me about that.
I think within the next 10 years, and he did. It was a like total freak accident. I want to share one more story. This is actually from one of our personal friends, or a couple, but they had a daughter. And when she was 5 years old, she had, you were talking about visions of Jesus, which, just a little caveat to that, Sheep Among Wolves 2 is a movie that you can watch on YouTube. And that is talking about the Jesus movement taking place in Iran. And all kinds of people in Iran are having visions and dreams of Jesus. So, if you're interested, I would encourage you to check out that movie. But our friends had a daughter. She was 5 years old. She has a dream about Jesus. And so she gets up in the morning, Mom, I had a dream about Jesus. And she's like, well, that's nice, honey. Tell me about it. And she says, well, he said that I'm not going to live much longer. And I'm going to go be with him pretty soon. Mm-hmm. So, as a mom, the, oh, honey, tell me about your dream, with Jesus goes from, this sounds cute, to being pretty scared, about this dream. And I think, I don't remember exactly what she said, but I think this was a conversation she kind of tried to put to the back of her mind, But within that same year, she was diagnosed with cancer. So immediately this dream becomes kind of a top of mind thought for the mom and dad in this case. And she ended up living until she was 11 years old, but then she did eventually die from cancer. But I mean, that's a powerful story of, kind of this interaction with the spiritual world, right? And at the age of 5, being given information, that you would think, for a 5-year-old to be way too heavy, but in reality, she was more willing to accept it than the adults were, She seemed very at peace with the thought of death and dying. And so yeah, I think, and we're about done talking, but there's this idea of the mind, consciousness, soul, whatever terminology you want to use. It's a fascinating thing to give thought to. I think it really bolsters the Christian narrative, gives us a lot of hope and excitement to think about it. You're right, we shouldn't chase after experiences, because I'm definitely not saying Christians go do drugs to have a near-death experience, because that would be anti-biblical. We're not supposed to chase experiences. We're just supposed to follow, living, and as modeled by Jesus, and that wasn't part of it, right? But it gives us a lot of hope, but it also puts a lot of question marks in the brain, in those thinking bubbles. There's just all kinds of little question marks in there, that we things that we don't understand, a lot of gray area concerning the gray matter.
Yes. Yeah, it's another one of those areas you have to kind of, or I have to kind of give over and trust God with, because it's like you said, there's a lot of questions, but there's a lot of areas in life where there's a lot of questions that I'm forced to either trust God with it or go, kind of be frustrated that my human brain doesn't understand. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's for I think that's everybody's kind of personal thing to work out with God, because, you know, I know for a lot of people it's a lot harder to trust some of those things with God. I know also a lot of people are much better than I am at really trusting God with everything, you know, the physical and the spiritual aspects of life. So, but it's definitely an interesting part of it.
Yeah. Well, we'll maybe have one or two more conversations about spiritual stuff, right? Let's not stop talking about spiritual side of things versus physical things just quite yet. There's some other interesting things to kind of talk about, because we're two things. We're physical and spiritual beings. There is a spiritual side to us. It's the physical part of us is very real right now. It's very tangible. I think the spiritual side we have to actually work at a lot harder, because it's there, but it's not fully there, if that makes sense. Like, we're not experiencing like what we will experience, obviously. So this near-death stuff kind of helps us kind of see a glimpse into, we don't understand it, but we see the glimpse of like, oh, there's more. We're going to experience like way more as spiritual beings than we're experiencing as physical beings right now. But I don't know if you remember the passage that talks about the angels being a little bit jealous of us human beings, because we're experiencing something that they aren't. So I think that talks about, so, you know, if we're going to die, we're going to experience something spiritual, and I think we're actually going to long to be physical again. So, and that would make a lot of sense, because what's the end of the biblical narrative? Well, the end of the biblical narrative is what you talked about earlier: spiritual and physical merging again, new creation, heaven and earth. And we now become fully physical, and I think fully spiritual. We're physical again, but I think we're also fully spiritual, and so we're experiencing the best of both at the same time. So that's, you know, what other word other than trippy can you use for that thought process? That's crazy. So, interesting stuff. I want to have a few more conversations about this. I read a book about the idea of hang on one second here. Yeah, I just wanted to, my wife called me, and I wanted to make sure I was still recording. But I read the book, and I'll have the title and everything here next conversation, about Christian contextualization of Native American culture, okay, or indigenous people. So it's talking about merging Christianity and indigenous culture, you know, kind of into one thing, honoring a people group and Christianity, which I found really interesting, because indigenous people groups have a pretty long history with spirituality, right? They really tapped into the spiritual side of things. Christians, as this book that I will tell you about, they get very freaked out, you know, by a group of people that are so spiritual. We don't like that. And so we label it as satanic and heretical, and anybody that's following Jesus that still wants to be true to some of their culture, we say they're a heretic and that they're satanic, and just stay away from them. But I think there's actually some things to learn from Native American culture, especially when it comes to how they engage with the spiritual side of who we are. So maybe we'll talk about that next time. And,
all right, look forward to it, my brother.
So come awake, man. Come with the 3 beverages. You need your water, you need your fruit smoothie, and you need your coffee, because that seems to keep you going.
Well, and enough sleep is probably number 1. You should probably think about that.
Could be the sleep too.
Health. All right, love you, bro.
Right. I love you too, man. It was good seeing your fresh, shiny skin.
Jeez, Hannibal Lecter.
You're always so pretty to look at. You know, you're just a very beautiful man. You know, I miss the long hair though. I'm not gonna lie. So hey, did I show you? I don't think I showed you this yet, but I was gonna wear it. But can you see that?
Wow, where'd you find that? Or is that a patch that you just put on? Oh, gotcha.
It's a patch. I had this patch sewn on my coat, but I'm officially a Team Zissou member.
There you go.
I now have the coat to prove it. So pretty cool. All right, man. I'm gonna let you go. It's good talking to you. At you, however you interpret that.
Yeah, it was all of it was wonderful.